Loud and Quiet presents Midnight Chats.
Hey everybody, welcome to Midnight Chats. It's the 20th of September today, 2018. Hope you've had a good day. We've had a busy one here at Loud and Quiet. We finished issue 128, sent it off to the printers. That will be out on next Saturday. So what's that? That's September the 27th is when that's out. We'll be announcing all the details of everything that's in it, but we're very pleased with it. We've got an incredible cover feature with an incredible artist this month. So that's what we've been doing. I managed to also get the worst haircut of my life today, which is mainly down to the fact that the hairdresser cut my sideburns almost above the ear. So now I just look like... I just look absolutely... I don't trust myself. I look at a reflection of myself. I don't trust that man I see in the mirror. And so I can't expect anyone else to. But, you know, I mean, it'll grow out. So a day of ups and downs for me. I hope yours has been good. It's, I guess it's Friday by the time you're listening to this. And the weekend's ahead, blah, blah, blah. But let me introduce who this week's guest is here on Midnight Chats. Brett Anderson, I'm sure you know, is the frontman of Suede. And I'm sure you know who Suede are, and you don't need me to go through all of this. But for those who might not... And I suppose a lot of our younger listeners probably might not necessarily know who Suede are. Someone of my age, we all know Suede. But Suede formed in 1989 and split up in 2003 originally. And they reformed in 2010. They're about to release their third record since reforming, which isn't bad going, considering it's their, 2, 4, 6? It's their 8th in total. But they're 3 since 2010. It's called The Blue Hour, and it is, as you'll hear Brett and I talking about it, it is essentially the third part of a trio, is the way that they see it. It sounds very much like Suede, and Brett is very clear about that. But it is a little bit different. It's quite, as I say to him, it's quite operatic, and there's some good visuals that have come with the early singles off it. That is out today as well. So it's a busy day, Friday. The Blue Hour by Suede is out today. So yeah, I appreciated the time that Brett afforded me. I actually went to his house to his flat, should I say, in Notting Hill, and we speak a little bit about that at the beginning. So it's always nice to go and have a snoop around, you know, a pop star's house. It was very nice, and I appreciated the fact that he let me do that, because, you know, if I'd had these sideburns then, I don't think he would have let me in. But fortunately I didn't. I had a sensible haircut. We got this recorded, and that's all I've got to say on it. So please sit back and enjoy this episode of Midnight Chats with Brett Anderson from Suede. How long have you lived in this area of town? Have you always been over West Side?
I mean, I sort of slightly complicated. I don't really live in London anymore. I kind of like live in the countryside, technically, but I'm sort of between London and the countryside. You never really leave London. So I've got a flat here in Notting Hill, I've been in Notting Hill since about 1990, something like that. 1991, something like that. I first moved to a little bit of Notting Hill, a road called Moorhouse Road. Nearly 30 years ago now. And I'm just sort of, I lived in the same area for about 25 years actually. But now my family, we all kind of like my family, we sort of moved to the country, but we have a flat here as well, which is kind of quite useful.
Did you go to Carnival? Do you tend to go to Carnival, or do you get out of here when that's on?
I normally avoid it, to be honest. It sort of depends. I mean, you know, I wouldn't sort of go out on my way to go. I mean, I was a bit. I used to be a bit of a curmudgeon about carnival, and then it's one of those things that kind of there are really exciting bits about it.
Yeah.
But just suddenly having kind of like a million people kind of like trudging around pissing on your doorstep can be a bit annoying. And there were a couple of times. I remember we went away and then came back, and then literally just the whole street smelled of piss, and it was pretty disgusting. But yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things, isn't it? You know, it's kind of like there's good things about it, there's bad things about it. I'm not kind of pro or anti. It's kind of like there's something quite exciting about it.
Then you grew up in Sussex.
Yeah, I was born in a place called Hayward Heath, which is sort of between London and Brighton.
My wife grew up very close to there.
Whereabouts?
A very small place called Shermanbury, which
I
is
hadn't even heard of
near Cowfold and
Yeah, I've heard of Cowfold.
Henfield.
Yeah, okay.
It's between the two. It's
Yeah.
it's like kind of 4 houses, you know. It's one of those little hamlet
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
So I do actually know Hayward Heath a little bit. I
Wow.
don't know many places, but I do know there. What was it like as a place to grow up?
Pretty unspectacular, I'd say. I mean, it's just a kind of grey little dormitory town, to be honest. I always feel as though I always spend my life kind of slagging. It feels like I spend my life kind of like bringing Hayward Heath down. It's not really. I don't really mean to, but it's kind of nothing. It doesn't really mean anything to me. It's one of those sorts of places.
Sure.
It's not like it doesn't have a kind of an identity like a city has, or you know. It doesn't really have that sort of thing. It's a kind of commuter town, you know.
When did you leave there?
I suppose when I went to university in Manchester in about 1980. God, when was it? 87 or something like that. I can't remember. My memory's not so good. And that's when I first left. And then I spent a year in Manchester, and then I went to UCL and studied there, sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, it's one of those places you don't ever really want to stay there. You know, it's one of those sorts of places you kind of want to escape from it.
Yeah,
It kind of like gives you quite an ambition to get away from it, to be honest. You know.
So how would you pass your time there?
In a funny sort of way, it's kind of like, you know, the lack of options is quite interesting because it sort of forced me and my friends to sort of kind of, I don't know, want to achieve something out of the lack of options. I sometimes wonder about if kids have got too many options, they've got too many, they can kind of become a bit numb to it, you know. And you know, it made me fall in love with music in a lot of ways because music was the only escape that you had from the kind of like the greyness and the mundanity of everyday life. You know, the kind of the glamour of music, I suppose, was the escape. And you kind of like, you know, music very very early on to me became an incredibly sort of like important force. My father was a huge classical music fan. And he kind of like force fed me all of these kind of like people like Liszt and Mahler and Wagner and stuff. And obviously, as was my duty as a son, I hated it.
Yeah.
And gravitated towards what was the exact polar opposite, which was punk rock, and you know, the power of punk rock music, which has been very over documented over the years. But it was kind of like, you know, discovering the Sex Pistols when I was, you know, 12 or whatever was a, you know, really key moment for me as a I think, you know, defining yourself, finding something that you love and finding it yourself is a really exciting thing. There's that sense that music kind of like is a sort of like badge of identity.
How did your dad take the Sex Pistols?
Well, he thought they were rubbish. He didn't, you know, he's from that, you know, kind of that sort of, he was the sort of person that unless it was sort of like high culture classical music, it was absolutely rubbish. You know, he didn't have much kind of like fondness for pop music. You know, he was kind of he'd sort of belittle the music I liked, but that was kind of quite good fun. I quite liked that sense of sort of challenge, which I sometimes wonder, you know, when I hear about kind of kids that like exactly the same music as their parents, I always feel a little bit sorry for them. I always thought that pop music was one of the point of it was that it was supposed to kind of instigate a generational conflict.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And that's very much what it did in my household. You know, I'd be upstairs playing the Sex Pistols on my little crappy sort of Boots stereo, and my dad would be blasting out kind of Mahler downstairs, and you know, be almost this battle of the volume of the volume pedals, you know. So.
And now you're the dad in your house,
yeah.
and what are
what a terrifying prospect that is, isn't it?
Are your kids into something that you think is equally as naff as your dad thought of the Sex Pistols, or are you a bit more?
I try not to sort of do that because I know that it's sort of almost sort of it's kind of like the more you think it's naff, the more I'm a little bit blank. My little boy, he's only very young, so he hasn't really got into music yet. He just sort of listens to whatever. But my stepson listens to stuff. He listens to a lot of trap.
Right, of course.
Yeah,
That's
which
the thing.
is kind
right
of
now.
what kids, 14-year-old kids listen to.
Yeah.
There's actually one singer that I quite like. He used to be into sort of rock and stuff, and Foles and stuff like that. And he sort of suddenly, in the last couple of years, he's got into trap. There's one singer that I really like that he likes. This guy called Jimothy Lacoste.
Oh yeah.
Have you heard of him?
Yeah, we had him in the magazine.
He's a kind of genius.
Yeah.
Like, you don't know whether he's serious or not, and the songs are absolutely hilarious. But you got to listen to the songs with the videos.
Yeah, the video
to
is
get
the
it,
key, yeah.
kind of thing. The videos of him dancing in kind of like supermarkets and stuff like that.
Yeah.
There's something about him that I really like. Brilliantly deadpan, Life is getting quite exciting. You know that one?
That's the one, yeah.
Brilliant.
That's his big number. We actually DJ'd at the festival at the weekend. We did a silent disco for the opening party of the festival on Thursday night. And Jimothy Lacoste was the hit of our set. We played a couple of his tracks, and that was the thing that people were most into out of everything we played from the year.
Yeah.
So he's doing things.
Oh, good. Well, I'm pleased for him because it's good that good stuff kind of gets recognition.
Yeah. So how's your relationship with classical music now? Do you look on it fondly or listen to classical music, or are you still like, no, that's my dad's thing?
Yeah, I can listen to classical music. I mean, I don't sort of find it offensive. I don't sort of love it obsessively like my father did.
Sure. Did he play? Did he play music?
No, not at all.
Just...
No. He was just sort of a fan kind of thing, an obsessive fan. And he was kind of had this sort of strange attitude to me playing, where he kind of like was always telling people that I was going to become a concert pianist, but didn't sort of get me piano lessons or anything like that. It was kind of this, I don't know, this kind of like strange kind of, some mismatch.
He just thought it was going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of like, okay.
So when did you start making music, or being interested in thinking, I'm going to try and be a musician myself?
Quite early on. I mean, the house that I was brought up in was quite creative. My mother was an artist. She wasn't a sort of commercially successful artist, but she painted, and that's sort of how she defined herself. She kind of made money by. She was a seamstress. She made dresses for sort of women in the area, and fixed things and stuff like that. But she was quite a creative person. Well, very creative person. She was always making something or mending something. And my dad used to sort of make things as well. He was quite creative in a different way, not in a less artistic way, in a more kind of practical way. So he used to make all of our furniture.
Right.
And, so everything we kind of owned was sort of homemade or secondhand or something like that. So it was kind of quite a sort of an odd upbringing, quite sort of left field and creative. And I think when it came to wanting to hear a certain sort of thing musically, when I couldn't quite hear it, I thought, well, I'll try and make it myself. And it was that kind of attitude. It's sort of like, if you haven't got it, you make it, and it's that sort of like, well, I can do that, because my mother used to make all our clothes and my dad used to make our furniture, so why can't I make songs? So I sort of sit there and bash out and try and write these rubbish songs, and those rubbish songs were rubbish for many years, and then at some critical point got quite okay, and people have started to like them.
Is that when you were in bands like the Pigs and Jeff? Were they your first two bands that you were in?
Yeah, the Pigs were, and Jeff, yeah, exactly. Just kind of like silly.
Were they punk bands?
I don't even know what they were. Do you know what I mean? You're so kind of like without any sort of identity. You're just sort of throwing all your influences and into the melting pot and making unlistenable rubbish. It's just guys sitting around. I mean, to call them bands is sort of like slightly kind of giving them a little bit too much kind of, it's giving them too much credit. It's just us sitting around with guitars on our laps, you know what I mean? It's just, you
talking about being a band.
Because because I've sort of answered questions like this, it's sort of like, they become, the Pigs, well, what were they like? People assume that we were kind of gigging around, playing the marquee or something. It's kind of some people sitting around kind of like writing some crappy songs, retrospectively, it's sort of like they've achieved more kind of, than actually at the time. But it's a rite of passage, isn't it, for lots of young men, forming a band It's exciting.
Can you remember when you first got up and sang in front of people?
No. When I first started off in a band, I was the guitar player.
Right.
That's sort of what I wanted to be. That was kind of.
Was that the band that would become Suede, or was that another?
No,
band?
there's a band. When I first started off in these early kind of like bedroomy bands sort of thing, I was the guitar player, and then I think we had this funny band called Jeff, and the singer left, and I got pushed to the front. It was kind of this weird sort of thing, and I was like, oh, okay, because I could sing I was the only one who could sing in tune, sort of thing. It became this sort of thing. And I'm like, oh, well, why don't you sing? I'm like, oh, okay, then I suppose I'll give it a go. I wasn't sort of like, oh, I want to be a singer. I had to learn to be a singer. I had to sort of learn to, to express myself. When I first started as a singer, I was kind of thought it was all just about sort of singing in tune and singing nice words and singing nice songs and stuff like that. I didn't understand the kind of how you've got to sort of emote and how you've got to give yourself to the music, all of these sorts of things, I had to learn that over many years of failure.
So when you started to sing in front of people, because I always think that's a really terrifying thing to do. And I don't think I've ever met any singer who said, oh, I knew I wanted to be the singer and I was comfortable being the singer from day one. And I don't know anyone that ever set out to be a singer and felt comfortable with it. It fascinates me that people put themselves through that torture, because to me, that's the hell. The idea of getting in front of people and having to sing is just... I don't think,
Well, that's why there's so much ego involved, because you have to believe in what you do in order to get up there. And that's why, and the ego obviously goes out of control sometimes, and that's what's so exciting about bands going off the rails. It's this madness that kind of just goes wrong, and people love the soap opera of it. But that's why there is so much ego in amongst musicians, and especially singers, because it's a sort of strange role to find yourself in, but when you sort of get good at it, which you have to sort of get fairly competent to sort of reach a certain standard, there's an incredible thrill, and it goes from being this terrifying thing, and in the early days it was terrifying. I don't really know how the hell I kind of pushed through those early days, because some of those early gigs were just so depressing. We regularly, there were more people on stage than in the audience. We once played to one person. Right. Things like that. It's like, how can you kind of, and you just have this sort of blind self-belief, and I don't really know what it was based on, because I wasn't particularly musically adept, and we certainly hadn't really learned to write and stuff at that point. And for some reason, I just pushed through it, and you just sort of, I don't know, it's that sort of self-belief which can mutate into hubris, I think.
Can you remember the time that it did switch from being terrifying? Because there was obviously something there that made you, as you say, and you don't even necessarily know what it was or where that belief in yourself came from, but it was obviously there enough to make you go, I know we've only played to one person tonight, but we're still going to do another show. Because a lot of people will be like, let's forget this.
Do you know what, it's a bit embarrassing. I think it's when we started writing good songs, and there was a kind of weird period when me and Bernard started writing really good songs. There was a weird period, there was about a 6-month period when we were sort of like writing songs that would end up being on the first album and kind of being lavishly kind of praised by the press, sort of thing. But we're playing those songs, things like Drowners and To the Birds and Pantomime Horse, all these songs that end up on the first album, Metal Mickey as well. And we were sort of still playing those to 2 people in pubs, sort of thing, and everyone was like, and we were kind of out. It was interesting things with Suede, because I think we were really out of step with what was going on at that point when we were on the cusp just before we made it. The whole sort of baggy shoegazing thing had just sort of like, it was just kind of coming to its dreary end. And Suede certainly weren't baggy, and certainly weren't a shoegazing band. We were sort of doing something different. And first of all, that was a weakness, because people kind of like just ignored us and thought, well, they don't fit into this. But it allowed us to sort of go away and become good at what we were doing, which was being Suede kind of thing. And then when we did sort of appear, we were kind of like, we felt like we were fully formed. We didn't grow up in public.
Sure.
We had a lot of time in rehearsal rooms and playing to one person in pubs to kind of like, learn our craft. Sort of thing.
And then the weird thing, I think, with Suede is that you then were out of step even with Britpop to an extent. And
Yeah.
retrospectively, that is still how Suede are considered now. When people talk of Britpop, a lot of the time they say that Suede kind of started Britpop, but then you kind of went your separate ways a little bit. It wasn't
Absolutely.
that was kind of your world necessarily. So you were kind of always out of step, I guess.
I've always wanted to be out of step. I've kind of like, I don't like being sort of running with big packs. You know, I've always liked sort of being sort of occupying our own little space. And it is ironic that we kind of were sort of associated with the sort of biggest movement of that whole decade kind of thing. But you're absolutely right. I don't think we ever felt any kinship with it. It felt as though we'd started it and then it kind of like disappeared off on an odd tangent. You know, when I was writing those songs in 1990, 1991, I was documenting Britain. And the bands that came later, I think, were celebrating Britain.
Sure.
And that's the huge difference there. You know, I was just singing from the point of view of a kind of like a poor, white, 20-something guy in London singing about my life. And my life was sort of like standing in dole queues, looking at the dandruff on the collar of the man in front of me, and sort of like, you know, rented flats and the throb of last night's hangover. You know, it certainly wasn't a celebration of this jingoistic flag-waving celebration that it became, the Cool Britannia thing. And I did distance myself from that. I thought it was ugly. I thought it was simplistic. I thought it was misogynistic. I thought it was horrible. And as soon as I saw what was happening with Britpop, I kind of distanced myself, and we wrote Dogman Star, which is as un-Britpop an album as you can possibly get. It's about isolation, it's about disintegration, all of these things. It's certainly not supposed to be a sort of like a beery sing-along of an album. And yeah, I've always been very proud that we've trod our own path. You know, sometimes it's hard, but I think that history looks back on bands that tread their own paths with, you know, kindly, hopefully.
Sure.
Who knows? Maybe not.
Yeah. And how about now? Because the Blue Hour comes out on the 21st of this month.
We just leapt about 20 years now.
I know. Sorry, I've gone straight for it. Just
I thought we were going kind of chronologically. And then suddenly,
we're just going.
No, it's fine. Go for it. Yeah.
Well, I just figure that. I mean, you must be sick of people talking to you about Britpop in any case.
Well,
or not so much.
I don't mind.
Yeah.
It's fine. I'd rather talk about what we're doing now, to be honest. But you know, I don't mind talking about it. I think as soon as you sort of start, no, I don't talk about that. That becomes the thing
that people talk about.
So I always try and talk about it and talk around it and have something interesting to say about it, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, the thing I was going to ask about the new record is in relation to what you were saying about how, you know, early days of Suede, you were writing about life in Britain, not celebrating life in Britain necessarily. Is that still the case now? Is that still what is when you go to make a record now, do you approach it the same way? Are you still just writing about your life in that same way?
Of course. I always look for the details, you know. That's always what I'm writing about. And with the Blue Hour, I'm trying to find a new expression of you know, I'm trying to find a new way to be Suede, I suppose. I'm trying to express myself in a fresh way, but I suppose express myself within the thresholds of what the band is. You know, you've got to kind of like recognise your limitations and your. I suppose you've got to recognise your personality as a band. You know, I'm not. You know, it'd be sort of very foolish for the band to think that we could suddenly sort of become a reggae band or something like that. I'm being kind of silly, but obviously not. But do you know what I mean? There's limitations in which Suede work, and with the Blue Hour, we're trying to sort of like push it a little bit further out. You know, I'm writing a lot about kind of. There's a sort of like it's set in quite a kind of like, almost like, it's certainly not set in an urban space. It's sort of set in a kind of like a slightly unpleasant kind of rural sort of hinterland. And I'm looking at lots of the songs are written from the perspective of a child's point of view. And I suppose I was doing that because I wanted in lots of ways, lots of the themes of the record is about kind of like parenthood and stuff like that. But I suppose the child's point of view was a way to try and create a sense of vulnerability and a sense of kind of like hesitation and a sense of unrest there. and I didn't want to sing from a child's point of view in a kind of cliched sort of like, everything's great sort of way. I wanted to kind of look at it from a sort of slightly darker perspective. Look at this kind of like create this almost like slightly nightmarish sort of like vignettes,
The trailer that preceded any tracks on the record is that footage of a dead bird, and with that soundscape underneath it for about 30 seconds or something.
Yes.
What does that embody, that
imagery?
Because there's a track on there as well, isn't there? Like an interlude called Dead Bird.
Yeah. It sort of became a kind of sort of quite symbolic for me of kind of what I wanted to talk about, I suppose. This sort of sense of kind of like the sense of sort of threat that there is in nature, the kind of like, that there's a sort of thing when you're in the countryside, you're constantly seeing roadkill on the side of the road, and it's always kind of like animals from children's stories, it's always kind of foxes and badgers and these sorts of things that you're kind of reading reading as children seeing them as these cuddly little characters, and then you kind of like you kind of find them dead on the side of the road.
You only ever see them when they're dead. That's true.
It's a kind of this odd sort of thing, so the kind of the dead bird image, I kind of quite, I don't know, it just sort of seemed to sum it up, and it seemed to sum up the sort of psychic landscape of what I wanted to talk about. It kind of seemed quite powerful, but at the same time quite prosaic, that kind of thing that it's very ordinary to sort of see a dead animal lying by the side of the road. There's nothing that special about it, but there's something sort of tragic about it and sad about it and quite moving about it in lots of ways.
There's a similar feel to the video for Life is Golden, which if anyone listening hasn't seen it yet, I'm guessing it's shot on a drone. It is shot on a drone?
Yeah.
And it's over Pripyat.
Pripyat, I think, is how it's pronounced.
Which is the town closest to the Chernobyl reactor that blew.
Yeah.
And it's this incredible landscape of a town that was deserted and nature's kind of overtaken it, I guess.
Yeah.
It's an incredible video because it's such an incredible landscape. Have you ever been there? Or?
I haven't been there. No, it's a friend of ours, Mike Christie, that made the video for us, and he sort of suggested. He's a big fan of the band. He's been a dear friend for many, many years. We met him through Derek Jarman in about 1993 or something. And he made it for us. He sort of said, "Well, let's try putting this footage next to the song," and we're kind of like, "Okay, we'll try it." And somehow, even though it obviously isn't, there's no narrative link between imagery of a deserted kind of town and the lyrics to the song, it somehow had a kind of grace and a kind of and a sort of poignancy that somehow reflected the lyrics to the song and kind of took the lyrics somewhere else. I don't know, I can't, it'd be very easy to make a bit of a sickly video for Life is Golden. I really didn't want to do that, and I like that there's something quite moving about the video, and I don't really know why it's moving. I've always loved that imagery, man's folly reclaimed by nature, that whole theme, the final scene in Planet of the Apes, with the Statue of Liberty on the beach, that sort of thing. It's fascinating. I've always been fascinated with, when you come across sort of like Second World War kind of concrete things in the countryside, overgrown. There's something really fascinating about it. And of course, with Pripyat, there's a whole level backstory of tragedy and all of these things that I don't mean to sort of belittle in any way, but there's something kind of very, in a very simplistic way, quite beautiful about looking at sort of like nature reclaiming concrete, and somehow it resonated with the song.
It almost suits the rest of the record almost more than that track itself in a weird way.
Yes,
because as a whole record, it's parts of it feel a bit operatic, should I say, in terms of like music. There's a lot of strings on there.
Yeah.
Do you think it's fair to say it's quite a dark sounding record?
Yeah.
Across it.
Yes.
And perhaps even your most kind of dramatic sounding Suede album.
Yeah, I think it is.
Did you intend that when you went in to make this?
Yeah, I think we were trying to sort of push it a little bit further, with Night Thoughts. I mean, Night Thoughts is pretty dramatic as well. I mean, I think we're just trying to sort of like just take it a little bit further out and make it, to do things that we'd not done before. Things like the spoken word piece. There's a spoken word piece called Roadkill on there, and to use things like choral voices and stuff like that. Just to try and push the limits of what we do a little bit further out. But I don't think that, there's nothing wrong with it kind of trying to make a dark record. I think people sometimes when you're kind of like in this sort of state, when I'm kind of promoting a record companies are a little bit fearful of this, of their bands sort of saying it's a dark record. I always kind of like slightly regret when I was promoting Dogman Star, there was that sort of thing. Bernard had left the band, and we were sort of trying to put on this brittle mask of optimism about the band's going to be, and I kind of like, there was this sort of bullshit narrative about the record being about ambition, all this stuff, and it's not a record about ambition. It's a record about disintegration and falling apart. But that doesn't make it any, that doesn't make it. If I was a kind of like a fan of the band, I'd want to listen to that.
Yeah.
I love things that are about failure and about falling apart and about darkness and stuff like that. We're not kind of a boy band. That's not the role of Suede, to kind of like make nice sounding sort of little love songs about kind of meeting a nice girl at the shop sort of thing.
Sure.
We're trying. That's not our role, and it shouldn't be. That shouldn't be what we're trying to do. One of the greatest things that's happened to us over the last, since we've reformed, is kind of realizing that we're not part of the mainstream anymore. And I think that's a really freeing thing. When you realize, we're not kind of going to get played on Radio 1 anymore and that sort of thing. And that's fine. We'll leave that to people in their 20s. That's absolutely fine. But if you're still making music in your 50s, and if you still really care about it, I think it's important to sort of explore these kind of murky corners of life, to try and take the format some sort of into a new place, Lots of my favourite records are dark, Unknown Pleasures. God, how dark is that?
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
It's it's about exploring these things, I think.
How do you feel when you're approaching a release of a record now?
Oh, it's always horrible.
Is it?
Yeah.
What the worry of it being how it's received?
Yeah,
or?
it's because it's sort of, you never quite know, because it's sort of, when you're making a record in this, how it parallels what we were talking about earlier about needing to believe in what you do in order to get up on the stage. In order to go in the studio and to write songs, in order to finish a song, you've got to kind of believe that you can't kind of get halfway through writing the song and think, oh, this is a load of shit, because otherwise you just wouldn't finish it. In order to finish these things, you have to believe in them. And so there's a certain sense where you're kind of like, you're sort of like manufacturing a kind of like a sort of fantasy about how the record's going to be received. And then when you actually release it, you're confronted with the reality. And even kind of like good reviews can sometimes be kind of disheartening. I can't even really describe it. There's something about
where they're being good, but they're getting it wrong.
Yeah, or kind of just there's just something belittling about kind of being in, your work being assessed.
Sure.
No matter how kindly it's being assessed, there's always something belittling. And this is the big sort of like paradox that artists struggle with, this whole thing of like, the axiomatic truth of like, you can't release your work into the public arena and then be annoyed if someone doesn't like it, because it's sort of like, well, you're asking for some sort of assessment of it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's, you do struggle with that, but it's kind of, you have to, if you're going to carry on doing this. I mean, what I've been thinking about a lot recently is how much a song or any kind of art lives with its audience. And you can create something, and it's not until you kind of give it to the world and get feedback about it and get that sort of, that you quite know what you think of it yourself, and that's an interesting process, I think.
Has it got any easier at all? When the first record was coming out, 20 days before, or however far we are, like 2 weeks before, can you remember how that felt compared to like how it feels now? Were you more of a wreck then than you are now?
I think you kind of, it doesn't really get any easier. It's like one of those sort of things like kind of dating or something like that. And I haven't been on a date for many, many years, but I'm kind of in my 40s, in my late 30s I did. And it's like, it's like, God, this is really hard work, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? It's one of those things that it doesn't, you feel as though...
It should be getting easier, but it
should be getting, it just doesn't. And it's fine. No, I don't know. I think when our first album came out, we were kind of on this huge wave of sort of madness, and I didn't even know what was going on with. I don't even know. I can't even remember what I was really like in those days. It feels like it was happening to someone else almost. I think as you get older, you get more sensitive. You get kind of like, it's never easy to deal with these things. It's always tricky. It's always a journey.
Mm. And this is the third record of. It's the third of three, isn't it? These three are a kind of
I think
package
of
they are a complement to each one of them.
Yeah, I think of it like that. Maybe I just like the idea of a trilogy, a triptych or whatever. It sounds quite cool. But strangely, I do think of them as like this group that they almost like one has led on to the other, and it feels as though we're sort of going further left field with the Blue Hour. That's almost like the kind of Night Thoughts was the sort of midpoint, and I think with the next one we'll sort of step back. And I don't mean that to sound kind of like, we're going to kind of like be less sort of, we're still trying to do things that challenge us and challenge our audience, but I think we'll step back from that whole journey.
When you started making Bloodsport as the first of these three, were the other two kind of planned out? They've become a three now, but was that a later thing?
I had a vague idea that we'd make sort of three records. I kind of like that idea. But you can never really think that far ahead.
Sure.
I mean, you can only really think of. I didn't sort of have you learn so much about the record you're making while you're making it, and you can have a vague, very, very, very vague idea of the sort of shape it might occupy.
Yeah.
But it always changes, and it should change as well, because it's sort of like you're finding things out about it, and that's where it becomes kind of real and interesting, in the kind of mistakes you make and the sort of all those sorts of things.
So where does the Blue Hour fit into the trilogy?
It's the furthest left field of the records. I think it's the most challenging, but I think in lots of ways it's the most rewarding. Once you kind of get inside the world of it, once you kind of like understand the record, once you kind of like you go through the looking glass, I think it's a really rewarding record.
Sure.
I think it's very, very rich. So that's my opinion, which is completely meaningless. It's not for me to say, but people whose opinion I trust, who know the band really well, that's the kind of message I've been getting back from people, that at first they were like, oh, okay, and then a few listens in, they're like, whoa, okay, this is going somewhere interesting.
And we mentioned your memoir. You've written a memoir between the last record and this record.
I did, yeah.
How was it? The last of these podcasts that I did was with Johnny Marr earlier this year, and we spoke about his memoir, and I asked him what it was like to write a memoir. Yeah. And my question to him was, well, did you find it as cathartic as you thought you would? And his answer was no. He is still waiting for the catharsism of writing an autobiography to hit him, and it's still not actually arrived. How was it for you?
Yeah, I did find it very cathartic. I loved the process of it, and I kind of learned a lot about myself doing it, actually. A lot about myself, and it started off as a very, very personal thing. Every memoir is very, very personal, but I think sometimes rock biographies kind of drift into kind of a formula. In the same way that bands drift into a formula. A band's life cycle is very formulaic. It's struggle followed by success, followed by excess, followed by disintegration, and very few bands manage to deviate from that path. And if you're lucky, you get kind of like end up at a point of enlightenment somewhere after that. And so therefore, rock biographies tend to follow a very formulaic arc, and I didn't want to do that, and that's why I finished. The book finishes in 1992 when we got signed, which I thought was a kind of like a symbolic moment in a band's career. It's the first moment where you kind of publicly achieve any sort of success, and regardless of what happens after that is another story. So I wanted it to be about a story about my early life, very much about my family. It started off specifically as a book about my father. And that's one of the main themes in the book. It's about kind of fatherhood, really. It's about looking at myself as a son and looking at myself as a parent, and kind of like, those kind of things. But obviously it became sort of not just a book about parenthood, it's a book about struggle and failure and all of these sorts of things. But I loved writing it. I
Yeah.
really did enjoy the process of writing it. I loved how writing prose kind of like, there's a real freedom to it, which you don't have when you're writing songs. When you're writing songs, you're kind of, there's something incredibly sort of, you've got to try and make it work within this very, very narrow kind of space. And it kind of, it's quite constrictive, and when it does work, it resonates really, really well. You know, the power of 3 words sung with the right melody and the right backing can be kind of life-changing.
Yeah.
But you don't have that kind of like freedom to sort of meander off and talk about your school dinners in 1983 or something like that within the context of a song, you know.
Yeah.
Certainly not in the context of a pop song. And I like that. I like just sort of like exploring these little avenues of memory, you know.
Do you envisage a time when you do write your memoir from 92 onwards? Is there a part 2, or are you not interested in that at all?
I wouldn't say I'm not interested. You know, it's about kind of trying to find a way into that isn't kind of, you know, just a kind of conventional path of trying to look at it from a different point of view, trying to look at sort of, you know, maybe more from the point of view of kind of like almost a sort of looking at myself as a case study, almost, and looking at kind of how success and fame and all of these things affected me as a person, almost like looking at that almost like as a sort of like a sort of like a case study. I don't know quite how to explain it. There's a really good book by Alain de Botton called The Course of Love, which is about a relationship, and at the end of it, it's just but it's a story of kind of people falling in love and falling out of love. And at the end of every chapter, there's a sort of almost like there's a couple of paragraphs which is sort of like from a sort of psychology point of view about what's happening to the people. He's feeling this because of this, she's feeling this because of that. Do you know what I mean? And it's really interesting to suddenly, it's almost like this sort of like, you know, sort of like this sort of an aside turn into the camera. By the way, this is going on here now. And it's kind of, I love that. There's sort of duality to it. And maybe I could write something like that.
Yeah. The first book is called Coal Black Morning.
Yeah.
Where does that title come from?
I don't know. I write a lot of things down. I steal a lot of things that I read, you know, things from newspapers and things that I overhear, and I just read it somewhere. I have notebooks, and I write all these things down in notebooks, and I probably nicked it from someone, and I apologise, but you know, there's no art's original, you know.
Having done your memoir, what kind of is there left that you would like to do?
The West End musical.
Yeah.
The you know,
Brett Anderson, the West End musical.
Of course, yeah. I don't know. I mean, no, I'm being facetious. I don't know. I don't sort of want to become a sort of jack of all trades. Do you know what I mean? I kind of like, I want sort of just making more music.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I really enjoyed writing a book, but I'm not sure if I am a writer. You know, no matter how much I enjoyed it, I feel as though, you know, you need to kind of choose your weapons, and I sort of like making records is very, very hard, and it actually gets harder as you get older. But when you get it right, and when you know, there's a sort of power to it that is incredibly addictive, actually. So, just making more records, really, I think.
Midnight Chats is a Loud and Quiet podcast. Music courtesy of Gold Panda. Search Midnight Chats on iTunes for more episodes and to subscribe. For more information, visit loudandquiet.com.